Switching gears a little bit here, you've had a very well-rounded performance career. It sounds like a lot of different styles and a lot of different types of gigs. But what do you think that some of the benefits of learning period music, historical music, and like maybe learning on those instruments? What are there? Do you see any benefits there? You know, to then interpret more modern repertoire. Is there any relationship between the two?
Well, unquestionably, learning, having some, experience with old instruments and then playing that repertoire on modern instruments, you have a whole different perspective on it.
Mhm.
Playing Renaissance music, I played in a few different Renaissance bands in New York City in the 70s and 80s, and we had a brass group, the New York Cornet and Sackbut Ensemble. So you learn differently when you're actually playing the instruments. You learn how they respond, how the music sounds. Just simple to say, the transparency of early brasses, Renaissance brasses, is much different than a lot of brass groups tend to play old music. Um, there's a lot of counterpoint in that music. There's a lot of things, that inner voices that have to be come out, and sometimes modern orchestral brass players, but it's a very thick, heavy way of playing that doesn't suit that music maybe as well. And I think playing old instruments, you get a feel for the music. So for us, like again, talking about the quintet, when we would do master classes, we would constantly talk about our concept of old music being something called historically informed.
Mhm.
So we're not trying to play old instruments. We're not trying to imitate the sound of old instruments, but we know what those instruments do. We know how they sound. We know how they respond. We know what the music sounds like through experience with that. And we use that knowledge to help us to do, viable performances of that music on modern instruments. So I'm on board with players learning, even casually learning old brass instruments just to have a feel for how the music got played. Um, how that has influenced, playing of modern repertoire on modern brass. I don't know. I guess I'd say personally, I feel like I had a very broad experience as a performer, and the broader experience you have, the more things you bring to performance of it, whatever you choose to play. And I think that so certainly to me, my experience musically on old instruments has influenced everything I've ever played. So maybe there are things that I would not have done with modern music had I not had experience with old music and old instruments. Hard to pinpoint things exactly, but again, the broad experience has got to be a plus. I mean, it just has to be, I think.
Right. Yeah, I feel like, the more a big part, being able to carry a successful performance career, whether a soloist or, chamber musician or whatever, is really being able to switch styles and blend styles together. And there's really no way to do that without exposing yourself to all those things, during your education and playing career. So I think that's a really good point to make, that it really only helps, in my opinion, to explore all of these different things.
I found myself that uh, I think a lot of players will feel like, oh, well, what you want to be able to do is you want to be, obviously you want to be flexible, but I think a lot of players would think about sort of, well, that means you compromise in certain ways. And frankly, I never saw it that way. I
Mm-hmm.
never thought about, well, I'm going to be a player that can do a lot of things because I'm not going to commit one way or another. In the brass quintet, I, was striving to be the absolutely best brass quintet trumpet player I could possibly be. And everything that I worked on to play in the group was to contribute in that way. As I started to play a lot in orchestras in New York, and started to play, with the, I mean, I spent certainly as an extra player, spent a lot of time at the New York Philharmonic. When I had the opportunity to go in there, I worked very hard to adopt my own playing in a way that I knew was the way the brass section played there. And a very nice compliment that was paid to me by Carmen Fornerato, who was a longtime trumpeter there. Really, really wonderful guy, old Italian guy, like very gregarious, friendly guy. And I remember the first time I went in there, and after rehearsal, he said, and this is how he put it. He said, you've been in town for a while. I knew about you. I always thought you were one of those tuku tuku guys, which to him meant I was like could play things, could play, had technique and all that. And he went on to say, but you were in here, you sound just like us. I had no idea. I remember thinking, yeah, listen, I can to sound like you. I mean, I
Yeah.
worked hard to be that player, but I always thought, again about my own career, I always thought you don't want to be the guy, like using that as an example. I didn't want to be the guy for the Philharmonic as an extra player where, okay, we called our top six guys and now we'll call Ray Mase because we got to him on the list. I
Mhm.
wanted to be the top guy. I wanted to feel like they want me to be the guy there. And wherever I worked, I felt like I worked very hard to be that person because I wanted to be. I wanted to be somebody that they wanted to have and not just somebody who happened to be available and could do the gig. So I don't know. To me, I approached, I did a lot of things in my playing in preparation and practice that were extreme is the wrong word, but like I said, when I started playing at the Philharmonic a little bit, I worked very hard to be the right player there.
Mhm.
With modern music, I worked very hard to figure out, what I needed to do to have the kind of technique and facility necessary to play impossible modern music. Again, just worked hard in all those directions to feel like I'm not going to be. I don't want to be a liability at any of this. I want to be really good at all of it. So I worked
Right.
hard toward it.
Yeah.
Um, what's your relationship with 19th century brass music now? I know you said you didn't really you haven't played it super recently, and you're not playing as much nowadays. But do you have any thoughts as to either the community uh, of maybe reenacting brass bands or that type of music in a college setting or anything like that?
Well, I know Phil Smith has a group, a brass band going down at University of Georgia. Since he's gone down there, I know going down there, that was something he really wanted to have. His early training with the Salvation Army and stuff. I mean, playing in a brass band is a big part of his history. And I know he
That's
has.
a British brass band, right down there.
I believe so. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, is that what we say? A Salvation Army band is modeled after a British brass band.
yeah.
So he started that, and I know that the students, enjoy it a lot and are getting a lot of good training doing that. Personally, I haven't really thought about a future in brass band exactly. For me, we, at Juilliard, as chair of the department, I sort of think of what the students need as, what's viable to what they're going to be doing when they get out of school. Having the American Brass Quintet at Juilliard is an attempt to, have them exposed to brass quintet playing on a sort of professional level, and they're going to do that. They're going to play in brass quintets. We haven't put a huge emphasis on brass ensemble there, primarily because there aren't really jobs for performers in a professional brass ensemble, or at least not extensively.
Hmm.
So we kind of focused, we focused the brass program more on what people are probably going to be doing to make a living, and what those priorities are to get. So I don't know if, and personally, I don't think for me, I'm not sure I'm going to do any other playing outside of my office here at home practicing.
Hmm.
I don't know if I'm going to get out and play.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I suppose it could happen. If somebody might ask and say, "Do you want to try this?" I might try it and like it, but
Hmm.
it's not on my radar as something I'm gonna spend a lot of time doing.
Hmm.
Gotcha.
Maybe just to spur a little bit more of a conversation, not to to be confrontational about it, but you and I were speaking before the interview about some of the research I'm conducting in the field of Civil War brass bands. Um, with your background that you were talking about earlier, growing up and having the experience of playing multiple different styles and not really being pigeonholed into a certain genre of trumpet playing, you feel like is what helped you become a versatile player and eventually land your job with the quintet. Uh, with all that being said, would you think, or wouldn't you think that having brass ensemble experience or, uh, you know, not a pop band, but any type of popular music experience being taught or at least facilitated at a collegiate level could help make players that well-rounded player that made you successful?
I certainly, yeah, I think you made a very good point, and I think you're right. I think that interestingly, for some of the top schools like the conservatories like Juilliard and Colburn and Curtis, I think that the field has become so competitive and so focused, so detailed that I think it's pretty hard right now for somebody to come out and feel like, well, there's a field out there and I could do a little bit of everything. I think when I came up, yeah, there was a huge freelance field in New York. That freelance field is not as extensive as it used to be, and who knows where it's going to be when we come back after this pandemic.
Right.
So I think that what I see at a place like Juilliard, the players that are coming in, I think are really focused on, I'm going to, take an audition and get a job in an orchestra. And I think that because of that, we're trying to be more refined about the education and less broad. Whereas maybe at the university level, where players are looking to, well, being more regional players where there's a lot of different things to do, or maybe, let's say with a medium-sized US city, if you're the player in that town, you're going to have to do a lot of different things. The road show that comes through for a month, and the Christmas concerts and this and that. I think in those circumstances, you're absolutely right that a broader palette, let's say, of musical experience and flexible playing style is really, really important. And I think that, yeah, having brass ensemble and other things, teaching those skills makes a lot of sense, particularly maybe more so, let's say, at the university level than with a more sort of focused education that you might get at a conservatory.